Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. Today, I'm talking to Aurora from the AMAI Podcast. I've told you about her, but now we are actually talking to her. And just right off the bat, what does AMAI mean?
Yeah, Amay is a translation of the word motherhood. It's a Shona translation. So,
Okay. And what language is that, or where's that from?
so it's Shona. It's an African language, and our logo we decided to have as the lioness, and we have her cub next to her, and I just felt like that was the epitome of strength and resilience in motherhood. Just seeing putting those two together, that's what we ended up picking.
Okay. And that's because that's the theme of your channel, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's all strengthening mothers worldwide.
And
Yeah.
like, what prompted you to do this? Like, how long have you been thinking about this, and where do you see yourself going?
Yeah, so great question. So I have always been really adamant about defending the family. And I think throughout history and throughout time, as we can see the families being attacked much more intricate levels. And back in 2018, I was actually at the United Nations presenting, co-presenting on fatherhood. And then after that, from multiple different experiences, I really felt that moms need to be really focused on. I feel like if we lose moms, we lose the next generation. And I don't feel like we have time to reverse that, right? In the amount of time that we have. And so I just feel really strongly that as a society and as a culture, we need to do what it takes to strengthen mothers. So
Yeah. Wow. So you presented at the UN?
yeah, this was back in 2018. Yeah. And it was on, actually at that time it was on fatherhood. But I I think um I think especially as society is changing so fast, I think we're seeing a dichotomy where you see kind of this polarization of what's happening in motherhood, and my hope is to really collaborate and to really pull together our core values as moms, and that's to raise strong, resilient, kind, loving, independent children, right? And so yeah, that's what we're doing. So
That
yeah.
makes me think of two things. The video that I put out this morning, it was it was going over a quote by at the time Elder M. Russell Ballard, and this is back in 2010, and he was talking about the fact that he's like, we're in the last days, and you can quote me on that, and it's accelerating. And he was one of his concerns was the philosophies of men, which obviously affect the family as well as other aspects of life. And then it also makes me think of President Eyring's 2020 talk in the October 2020 General Conference called Sisters in Zion, where he just flat out said, after reading in the book of Moses and the book of Enoch, or sorry, the city of Enoch, coming and meeting with the church in the last days, that these women right now, this is paraphrasing, but he said, your daughters, your granddaughters are going to be the women that prepare this society, like our Zion, to meet with their Zion. Just
Wow.
like that, just like flat out. And
Wow.
so it probably isn't a mistake that you're feeling, the prompting to do this right now. That's my
Yeah,
opinion.
that's cool, and I hadn't heard that exact one, so that's really beautiful. And a part of what I've been feeling really passionate about in this regard is um, helping moms and individuals in general become mentally strong and spiritually strong, because I feel like right now, especially in what the world is going through, right? We're being bombarded on all levels. And I think I've been super excited to talk and to meet with you today, because I feel like you have one of the most unique audiences in the world, right? I mean, the people that are listening right now, they're with it, they're invested. I mean, they're on the right track, right? And they're listening to you be able to pull together all this information, synthesize it, and talk about the second coming, which I think is just incredible. And I know that you have different religions and stuff that are listening to this, which I also think is really, really cool. Talking about just, mental strength and stuff. Have you read the book, The Second Coming of the Lord by Lund?
No, I haven't. Like these days, I have like no time to read anything, basically.
It's a good one. And just to share a quick quote, I won't quote it perfectly because I read it years ago, but he ends up saying beautifully, and of course I'm not quoting it exactly, but he ends up saying the individuals that made it across the plains, these are the people who joined the church, listened to the prophet, packed up all their stuff, trekked across the plains and survived. He said, those are the people who that Zion was built upon their shoulders, and they were made out of pure steel. And he said, the saints that will be left by the time the second coming comes will also have to be made out of pure steel. And I love that, because right now we're seeing the default of society solve for ease and comfort, right? Like that's what people are wanting, right? And refining doesn't come through ease and comfort. And I feel like anyone who's watching right now has probably gone through something hard in their life, right? And I feel like there's been a huge influx of that, even in the last few years, of so many trials and really exquisitely hard things that people are going through. And so for me, I'm trying to help people. How do we learn how to handle hard better? Does that make sense?
Hmm.
And the quote, where is it? Is it in Ephesians? Yes, Ephesians, what is it, 6:12? I like how we're told, like, what are we battling? Like this battle that we're in. And I truly believe that one of the biggest battles we'll ever be a part of is the one that's in between our two ears, right? It's the battle over our mind. And I love in Ephesians 12, he says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm sure people know the scripture, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And I just think that there are ways that we can become mentally and spiritually strong enough to handle the last days, but what will that look like? And so I wanted to just maybe go in a little bit about that discussion, if that's something that you're
Yeah.
interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge problem. Just maybe like a week or two ago, I was reading a quote from, I believe it was from Ezra Taft Benson, and he was talking about, and this was back, decades ago, and he was talking about the effects of like television and radio and media and stuff like that, and how it gets into that space between your ears.
Yeah. Yeah. And that battleground is some of the most sacred ground that we need to make sure that we are in charge over, right?
I mean, if
And
your
so
body is a temple, if you
yeah,
were to equate it to the Temple of Solomon, or I've always thought about it this way. It's like your mind, your brain, in your body, it's the holy of holies. That's
yes.
that's that's the command center. So if you can get in there, you can corrupt the entire thing.
Yes, yes, I love that. And I feel like right now we're seeing, I think one of the best attacks that the adversary has right now that he's using is the attack on identity.
Mhm.
And we know this, especially when our prophet is saying, know your identity, right? It's like we are children of God, children of the covenant, these things. And he's trying to really help us hone in on that. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about Moses, and how, in Moses 1, God is telling him all these things, and he repeats multiple times, Moses, my son, my son, my son. And then right when he interfaces with the adversary, one of the first things Satan says is son of man. And he's trying to dismantle that core identity, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really powerful. And I think that that is happening at an accelerated rate. And in fact, I guess I could screen share this really quick. I just like this. I like this quote. I'm gonna come over here. So this was the last quote. Let me move. Oh, I can't. get to the quote I was hoping to. Give me a minute. It's moving.
While you're looking for that, I just want to say, I remember when I was a teenager, like I had a solid testimony. I always did. There was one year that I actually did kind of like take a break from church because I'd come across some anti-material and I didn't know what to do with that. And so it affected my testimony.
Oh,
But all throughout my childhood and teenage years, I was pretty solid with the church. But even then, I was like trying to figure out who I was, and it's almost like I
man.
put on different costumes, so to speak, different social costumes. Like, am I this person? Am I that person? And this is me, somebody that's been a member of the church my whole life, and the youth in particular are really prone to figuring out who they are, because they're brand new to life, and I think Satan sees that vulnerability, and he wants to get in
Right.
there as soon as possible. Like, you are whoever you want to be.
Exactly.
Be this, be a cat, be, the opposite sex, be whatever. Um, so it's kind of
Right.
identity. Yeah, that is a big deal. Yeah.
It's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. And this quote, I think is really beautiful. This is from President Nelson, and he says, "The adversary is increasing his attacks on faith and upon our families at an exponential rate. To survive spiritually, we need counter strategies and proactive plans." And I think, if you think about exponentially, we're seeing this just, it's not just a slow and steady anymore, right? He's telling us that this is happening, and to realize how sophisticated he is and being able to do that is really important, and to try to understand what are our strategies and counter strategies, because the adversary obviously has them, and so how do we combat that? And a reason why I've been really interested in this is because I had a PhD come on, and he took a totally different way approach to mental health than I've seen anyone else do. And the difference is he is helping people heal from the inside out instead of the outside in. And it has been fascinating to see how successful his work is. And you have all these different things. You have EMDR, and you have another idea called art, all these ways that you can help someone mentally heal. But his whole premise is, if you don't get to the core of who they are, again, identity, if you
Mhm.
don't help them rewrite their negative key core beliefs, they won't ever fully heal, which is really interesting to me, because I feel like that's a lot of our world, right? It's like we're trying to solve things from the outside in instead of the inside out. And through his research and everything he's been doing, he's been able to take people who have gone through exquisitely horrible traumatic events or repeated traumatic events in their lives. And when he's able to identify their key core beliefs and help them rewrite that, um, and key core beliefs are something like I am statements, which are really powerful, right? Especially when you hear, God himself saying, I am that I am. And so when you're saying, I am incapable, I am unworthy to be loved, I am unsafe, I am all these things, if you can redefine those and rewrite those, he's been able to help people heal within a matter of, we're talking like 8 weeks. People have gone through horrible traumatic experiences for years of their life. And I think that's what our prophet's trying to help us do, right? Like when he's saying, think celestial, he didn't say, you have to be celestial, act celestial. It's think, like it's coming from our minds, right? That's where we really need to start this change and this resiliency, right? And so I think it's powerful to understand how important it is of what our own how we view ourselves and how important that is. There was a book, it's called The Untethered Soul. And a quick quote from that was really interesting. It's not, I actually don't even know what religion, or if this person has a religion, but I'm sure he does have a religion. I just don't know what it is. But he had a really interesting question. And he posed the question, what's the difference between a worldly person and a spiritual person? And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Jared. But for me, immediately I was like, oh, worldly, it sounds, materialistic, or, things like that. And how he described it in the book is, he said, a worldly person chooses to depend or rely on the world to fix their problems. And a spiritual person knows that they can solve their problems internally and with a higher source. And I think right there is powerful, because that is what our prophet is saying. Israel means let God prevail. Let God prevail. It's not us advocating our agency to someone else to say, okay, I'll heal when you say you're sorry. I'll heal when you know, bring restitution to whatever's happened in the situation. It's, I know I can heal because I will let God prevail in my life. And
Yeah.
we don't need anyone else, and that's the tough thing with agency, is the difference between fault and responsibility, right? It may not be your fault that something horrible happened to you, that were cheated on, or have cancer, or lost your job, or all these things, but it is your responsibility to heal your own heart. And that's what happens spiritually with a person that knows that they can do that with God, right?
Yeah. I've talked about it many times on the channel, um how basically, like, when it comes to living the gospel, it's
Mhm.
great to do the things. It's great to live the commandments. But unless you're like becoming those core principles, like,
Yeah.
we're commanded to love, we're commanded to be charitable, do all these different things. And it's great to do them. But like the idea is that over time, you actually become those things. You're
Yeah.
not just like pretending to, and that's what some people do. Some people, they have ulterior motives. They join this church and they're not on the same path. They don't have the same desires. But if your desires are to become like Christ, um, and accept his teachings, then you start to become like Christ.
Yes.
And so once you make those things a part of you, if you do become love and charity and patience and meekness, then, well, those are the same qualities that Christ has and God the Father. So if A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. And that's
Yeah.
the whole point. So doing that inner work is extremely important. And there's some
I
people
love.
that don't want to do that. It's too scary, because they have a really bad track record. But you got to do it, and not just yourself, like what you're saying. It has to be it has to be with the Lord. It has to be with God. Like, you can't do it yourself. You have to rely on Him.
Yes. And what you just said reminds me, it's like, we're not human doings, we're human beings. Like, what are we becoming? And I sat down one time and thought about the idea of, like, be anxiously engaged. And I was like, what am I honestly anxiously engaged in? And it's like, is there good, better, best? Here I'm a mom of four, and I'm chauffeuring my kids from here to here to here. And this was a while ago, and I just really realized that I didn't want to be anxiously engaged in all of these things, right? And again, there's good, better, best, but what if we honestly ask ourselves, what are we anxiously engaged in, and who are we becoming because of that, right? Um and as you were talking about, really quick, as you were talking about the youth and our identity and everything, something I think that's really interesting is asking ourselves, are we valiant? And the idea of valiant can mean a lot of things, but when you look into the etymology of the word valiant, it comes from valor, which means of worth. And I believe if we honestly know our worth, and if we can help our youth, our kids, our grandkids genuinely, not just, writing up on a board, I am smart, and having these, you know, statements, but genuinely to their core believing in who they are, it will create a whole, I believe, generation of valiant. Because if we know that the worth of who we are, it changes us as humans. And I feel like if we know our true identity, it can inoculate us from everything that Satan's trying to throw at us, right? And
And how can moms help with that? Right? Because
yeah.
they're kind of a key part. Like, what are some thoughts that you have? Like, what are some things that moms can fix, where maybe they're not helping right now,
Yeah.
as much as they should?
I think that's a really good question. I think a big part of that is the example that you give your kids. And I would say specifically to this audience, think about, let's say you're metaphorically, you're at the tree of life, you're there, you have the fruit. How would your children or your posterity describe you at the tree? Are you worried? Are you anxious? Are you fearful? I think at this point, we don't have the luxury to be the example of fear to the world as moms or as a church, right? Like, we have the most fundamental saving ordinances and truth, and yet there's so many people that are really overcome with fear, and we live in a fallen world, and there's so much to be fearful about. But when you think of faith and fear, I think it's interesting. But also when you look in John, it says perfect love casteth out fear. It's not perfect faith casteth out fear, it's perfect love. And I think that's interesting to maybe anyone listening to really dive into that and what that means. And so I think for us, especially as examples to the world, even as moms, what example are we showing our kids when we have hard times? Are we, because I think of these parents, and it's one of the hardest things to have your kids stray off the path. But if your kid is straying off the path, and if they're looking at you and you're hand wringing and you're worried and you're concerned and all this stuff, it's like, are they really going to want to go back to the tree? Is that really what's going to draw them there? Or is it going to be this love and confidence and realizing, they have their agency, you have your agency, but this is where God's love is. And I know that, right? So I think a biggest part of it is coming down to your example as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, because like, what are that you're like one of the primary people that that a child learns from is their parents, especially their mom.
Yeah.
I think another big component to it is time. You know, that if you're a parent that's kind of like withdrawn, you're doing your own thing, you're worried about like your material pursuits, and you're not giving very much time to your children, then they'll go other places.
Yeah.
And especially when they have these questions about identity, who am I? Who am I going to become? They'll go to other places, and they should be coming to you. I've noticed that there's like there's been like a big difference between the times that we've spent a lot of time with our children and times when we've been more busy. It definitely has an effect. I actually remember there was a friend of mine in high school that they weren't members of the church. They smoked and they were just like worldly, but they were like good. And I was like always kind of blown away at how good of a kid my friend was, despite not having the same values necessarily. But he spent a lot of time with his parents. Like he would like hang out with his parents. And I was like,
Interesting.
that's kind of weird. I'm not really that used to that. But they were like a really tight family. And it was clear that they had a really good influence on him because like a big part of that is like when you have issues, like, do you feel comfortable coming to your mom or dad?
Yes.
Like,
Do you
are they going to
have
listen
that
to you?
relationship
Yeah.
built?
Are they going to just
Yeah.
like be dismissive of your concerns? Are they going to like actually care about what your concern is?
Yeah. And be invested in that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. Something else along this topic of, like, like, how do we help youth? How do we help kids? How do we help the next generation? A good friend of mine did her research on how do we pass religion through generations. So not just, missionary work, right here, right now, but how do we get what we believe as a society or as people or as families passing through from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. Anyway, she was the one that was really diving into this, and guess what it comes down to?
What?
It actually comes down to storytelling, which I think is beautiful and simple and also fascinating, because there's so many things that it could have come down to, right? But when we think of storytelling, we can think of, yes, this is how things have been passed down from the beginning. The Bible, you even have, the Iliad and the Odyssey that date, 8th and 7th century BC. But the interesting thing about that I think is really important for people in your audience to realize is that passing these stories down is what will keep their whatever they believe in passing down through the generations. And I think what's unique about our stories and our religion is that our stories of faith come down to a God of deliverance. And I think that's really important because, you can learn from Greek myths and you can learn a lot of things not to do, right? But when you really dive into these stories and you think of Christ speaking in parables, right? I think we're underestimating how important it is to be passing down those stories. And it makes me think, I wonder how many Christians, let's just say in the US right now, any denomination of Christians are consistently reading the Bible to their kids or having the Bible consistently read to their kids, right? And so we're seeing a break in religion altogether, right? We're seeing people right now aren't going from this denomination to this denomination. They are leaving religion altogether. And I think if we could really reground ourselves in that idea of understanding how important it is of storytelling, I think we could help this next generation, right?
Well,
And
Satan definitely understands the importance of storytelling, because that's why Hollywood is such a stumbling block, because
yes,
they're telling other stories, and they're telling stories that are like, that really appeal to the natural man, that really appeal to you getting dopamine hits and excitement, and if you live that way, then you're going to be more attracted to these other allegories that are being told that don't really have morals, or they don't have
right.
values. um
Right. I
yeah.
totally agree with that. And when we realize, um, our stories are about a God of deliverance, right? Over and over and over and over and over again, and delivering us and freeing us and, freedom and all this stuff. The interesting thing is when you look back at the God of Baal or Baal, right? Biblically, he was known in part to be a God of freedom. But the interesting thing is, he was considered the God of freedom from Yahweh, or freedom from God himself. And so I think, are we not in that same boat where right now society is saying we want to be free from all consequences, right? And all restraints and everything. And so to be able to help our children delineate this and say, oh, let's show you what true freedom looks like. I think of even just the quote of forgiveness is another word for freedom, right? And I think of miracles, just going into the idea of miracles briefly. um, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, and maybe your listeners can prove me wrong on this. I was trying to think about if there's any miracles that don't have to do with deliverance in some way. And I think this is important to dive into, because I mean, can you think of any miracle, whether that's you know, blindness, where the Savior is curing someone from blindness, or delivering them from leprosy, or delivering the children of Israel from, one of the most powerful armies at the time. And I was even thinking, well, what about like the miracle of life itself, right? But even that, we're being delivered from eternal damnation, meaning being stopped, right? It's like we're able to keep progressing. And I think that is beautiful, because I think we need to help instill in our kids that we still believe in a God of deliverance, because I believe that is a key point of how they are going to survive the last days. And I believe that because when our prophet himself, you would be able to quote it better. What was his quote on, the greatest miracles are yet to
Yeah,
be?
between now and the sign of the Son of Man, that's in the footnotes. He cites Joseph Smith Matthew. Between now and then, the world would see the greatest manifestations of the
Yeah.
Savior's power that the world has ever seen, in that the faithful can expect blessings, privileges, and miracles during this period. That's
Yes.
basically paraphrasing it.
Yes, and I love that. And when we think, that gets me really excited. That also makes me think, okay, so what are these miracles going to be delivering us from? Right? I mean, if those are like some of the biggest miracles, just realizing And our prophet are warning us and forewarning us, right? Your entire channel is on what's coming, right? Like things that we're gonna have to experience in our kids and our grandkids. And anyway, and so in this, I go back to, again, Moses, and I think about God and how my concern is that this generation, when we see the calamities, hearts will fail them and all of these things. But if we can see these calamities and show this generation that we believe in a God of love, who is a God of deliverance, can we show them that every time that there is a calamity, it's a God giving his people a chance to repent. He's giving his people a chance to return to him, right? And so, like, for example, in Moses's time, we know God is no respecter of persons and he loves all of his children. I truly believe he loved Moses just as much as he loved Pharaoh. And he gave Pharaoh a chance over and over and over and over again. And he will give us those chances as a people, as a nation, as a world, and it will come in the chance to be humbled, right? And so I just hope that we can share these stories to our kids, and even our own personal stories. I decided this last Easter that we were going to have a new tradition, and it was going to be every Easter I want to share our own personal and family stories. And we may share some of the same stories for the next 20, 30 years, but that's what they need, right? That's like where you see Nephi being able to handle going into Laman, because he's like, oh, 50 people, and Laman and Lemuel are like, oh man, he has 50 soldiers. And Nephi's like, yeah, our ancestors were, saved from the largest army in the world. He's remembering the stories of deliverance, right? That his parents have told him over and over and over again. And so I just hope we realize how important it is to really ground our youth in understanding miracles, and that we do believe in a God of deliverance. And when you look at the word, as we close, as you look at the word succor, a translation of that is to run to the aid. And it's like we believe in a God, a king that doesn't just sit up high on his throne and look at his, at his people. We believe that when we are in need, that we believe that he will run to our aid. And I believe that. And I believe that we will see that happening over and over and over again in these last days. And we need to make sure we have the faith to make those miracles happen, right? And not be overcome by fear, especially when we see fear is the number most repeated command in scripture. I mean, when it's told over and over and over again, there's a quote from Holland that he says that's probably one of the most broken commandments of all commandments is thou shalt not fear. And so my hope is to, in the short time that we've had, is to hopefully inspire and to show, to help others realize, who are we showing up as, who are we becoming, and how do we show this next generation what faith looks like, because they will need it. So.
Yep, absolutely. I agree with all that. Well, thanks, Aurora, for coming on here. Everybody, make sure to subscribe to her. I'll put the link for her channel in the description box below. You can also go to my homepage and go down to featured channels, and she's in the #1 spot because I'm featuring her right now. But please do. It's voices like hers that need to be heard, and it would be great if you could support her. And I know that she has a lot of good content that's in the works. So, but that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. If you have any questions for Aurora, put that in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks, Jared.